Hello, and welcome to the podcast series on listening strategies for French immersion students, produced by the faculty at the Official Languages and Bilingualism Institute of the University of Ottawa. This podcast is part of a series to help you improve your listening strategies and to provide practical hints on note-taking in the context of academic courses in your second language.
Podcast 3, Monitoring and Problem Solving During and After the Lecture.
Now that you've become proactive in your listening, anticipating what you're likely going to hear, you can become more actively engaged in the lecture by monitoring or checking what the professor says against the predictions you've made. As you listen actively, you'll be better able to pick up on the important points and fill in the outline you've either sketched on the page in front of you or mentally framed in your mind.
What do you mean by listen actively?
Well, active listening means as you listen and take notes, you're monitoring or checking what you hear against what you anticipated hearing. When the lecture takes a different direction from the one you expected, you adjust and reorient your predictions. It's always important to be flexible. Good listeners adjust their strategies to the direction the speaker takes by using the metacognitive strategy of problem solving. As you're listening, you're always trying to anticipate the next point based on the knowledge of the topic and the content of the reading that you did before the lecture. If you anticipate correctly, the points made by the professor will reinforce your predictions. If, however, you're wrong and the lecture doesn't match your expectations, you'll have to problem solve to discover the reason for the difference. Either way, the likelihood of understanding and remembering far exceeds what you would have understood if you had only sat back and been a passive listener. This is why planning or predicting, monitoring and checking, and problem solving are such powerful strategies for learning. So, one thing you'll want to do is identify the main points. Planning will help you identify these. However, it's not always easy with every professor. Beginning from the first class of a semester, learn how that professor tends to convey main points and how he or she typically structures a lecture. Discuss this with your fellow students and the professor in your FLS support class.
But that's exactly my problem. I don't always know what's important. What kind of clues can I look for to take more concise notes?
Well, you can pay attention to the professor's intonation and the volume of his or her speech. Usually, louder speech suggests an important point is being made. Lower volume often signals the conclusion of a point, and consequently, that a new point is coming soon. Paying attention to transition words can also help you locate where you are in the lecture. For example, dans un deuxième temps tells you that the professor is beginning the second point among the number of points highlighted at the beginning of the lecture. And en guise de conclusion lets you know that a final concluding statement is coming up. Transition words also signal the type of argument the professor might be making. Expressions such as en revanche or par contre set up a contrast with an earlier statement. The word si at the beginning of a sentence always signals some kind of hypothetical statement.
And what if I can't understand the professor's accent?
Well, that is a problem, but you can always ask the professor to write out an unfamiliar word that seems to be important. Then, when you go to your FLS support class, you can discuss strategies for handling the unique accent of the professor. Sit close so that when you don't understand, the professor may pick up on your puzzled face or other nonverbal language from the class. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
How do I know when it's the right time to ask a question?
The professor may open up time at the end of the lecture, invite questions during the lecture, or solicit questions of clarification at the beginning of the following lecture. Pay special attention to any cue that could facilitate exam study or assignment preparation. These cues will likely come at the opening of a lecture. And be sure and ask for a copy of the PowerPoint presentation if available.
What if the professor is not willing to provide the class with the PowerPoint?
Well then, in that case, you'll have to make adjustments. There can be a memory overload if you're busy paying attention to the PowerPoint presentation and listening to the professor and trying to take good notes. In those cases, you have three options. One, you need to learn to focus your attention more selectively based on your preparation for the lecture. Or two, you can team up with a peer from your FLS support class and divide up who pays attention to what, and then share with each other after the class. Or three, you could ask a Francophone student from the content course to borrow his or her notes. And finally, don't let your mind wander. Actively preparing for the class will help you to focus and become engaged in the lecture. You may need to work at this, but this habit of attentive listening can be developed by using the strategies presented in these podcasts. To conclude, actively preparing for a lecture by predicting lecture content can help you become engaged in what the professor is discussing. And these predictions are important for monitoring and checking your ongoing understanding, and for further anticipating what the professor will say during the lecture. Confirming predictions and the problem solving that occurs when predictions are not met will lead to greater engagement in the lecture. And that means you'll take better quality notes and you'll learn more deeply. Thank you for listening to this podcast on effective listening strategies, brought to you by the faculty at the Official Languages and Bilingualism Institute of the University of Ottawa.